So I'm going to break down who Behemoth and Leviathan are, or Behemoth. Is it Behemoth or is it Behemoth? And Leviathan. And we're going to look at what the prophets said about them. And going to go to multiple sources and bring it all together. But this verse particularly, where it says in 2 Esdras 49, you did ordain two living creatures. See, in the King James translation it says you called one Enoch, but in the other translations it says Behemoth. So it was Leviathan and Behemoth, and you separated the one from the other. And Enoch has the dry land, wherein are 1,000 hills. Okay, but unto Leviathan you gave the seventh part, namely moist, which is the sea, and have kept him to be devoured of whom you will. So in a King James translation of the Apocrypha, I find it sort of not quite as good as there's a good news version on Bible Hub, which it breaks it down with Behemoth and Leviathan, but then it goes on to say you gave it to your people to eat. So it's like, you know, if we also look at verse 9, where it says about Esau and Jacob, Esau being the temporal kingdom and Jacob being the eternal kingdom. So it says in verse 9, Esau is the end of the world and Jacob is the beginning of that which follows. So I mentioned this earlier in a video I did a while ago called I think I just called it Obadiah, and I was looking at the prophecy of Obadiah, which was against Esau and Edom, where it mentions about though you exalt yourself as the eagle. You know, if I read it, it says all the men of your confederacy have brought you to the border. The men that were at peace with you have deceived you and prevailed against you. They that eat your bread have laid a wound under you. I mean, we're in one of the biggest confederacies the world's ever seen at the moment, with, you know, the United Nations. So in allegory, Esau is the temporal kingdom, Jacob is the eternal kingdom, the one follows another. As it says, Esau represents the end of the age, Jacob represents the beginning of the new age. Bible works like that commonly. It's like with Galatians 4, you had Hagar being the bondwoman and Sarah being the free woman. So when we read, you know, if you come to my channel and we're reading the Bible, we're always given a spiritual interpretation, which is not obvious at first. So 2 Esdras 6 is basically, you know, a spiritual interpretation of these two beasts. Both of them are, you know, the last days are the time of Esau. It's the temporal kingdom of Christ. It also pertains to Haman in the book of Esther. You had Haman and Mordecai. So Haman was the prefect who conspired to exterminate the Jews, and, you know, in the same way, Antichrist. This is a representation of Antichrist. This is basically Esau, who is also Behemoth and Leviathan. So, you know, Leviathan is pagan Rome or classical Rome. That is Leviathan, and Behemoth is Antichrist. Also, it has to, you know, if it has to be an empire, then it's the Holy Roman Empire, which is a continuation of classical Rome. You know, in books like Ezekiel, I got 32nd chapter. Again, Leviathan. It talks about polluting the rivers. You know, if you're polluting the rivers, it's talking about the idols. And also, you know, at the end of the 42 months, which is the last days, which is 2,000 years, it says the birds are going to feed on the slaughtered beast, the slaughtered Leviathan, the slaughtered Behemoth. So the two kind of work in tandem, because in Revelation 13, the two beasts, you'll notice Leviathan and Behemoth are not mentioned. It just says the two beasts, but one comes up from the sea, another is on the land. So you're having to read between the lines there and interpret them as Behemoth and Leviathan. And it says that Leviathan's wounded by the sword, and then after Leviathan's wounded by the sword, Behemoth rises up. And so we can see that with the fall of Rome, which happened. Famously Rome couldn't conquer the Germanic tribes, and it actually used to use them as mercenaries, and they called them barbarians. But they migrated into their kingdom, and they also had sort of wars with them. The different tribes, the Huns, etc. But they started to sack Rome because they had no food. I mean, that was the reason. The Visigoths went and sacked Rome with Alaric in 410 because they had no food. They besieged Rome, and Rome was coming to its end. In any case, it was constantly warring and couldn't keep raising the money to put armies together, so it was hiring mercenaries. That's why the Germanic tribes became involved, and eventually the Germanic tribes took over. It was called a period called the Barbarian Wars, which is very interesting. And the Germans ruled Rome. It was the Ostrogothic papacy. The Ostrogoths took over and started to rule, and they'd already been Christianized. Back when the Roman Empire converted in 325 under Constantine. All these different kingdoms that were in Europe, like you had the Franks, Burgundians, and the Germanic tribes, they all saw Rome as the head of the Christian church. There was no other schism that I'm aware of at that time. You had individuals who would rebel against Rome, like Priscillian, who was Spanish, but other than that, there were no sects. I mean, they came later, sort of, with people like the Waldensians around 1100. So at this particular time, like 6th century, Rome was just seen as the Christian church. There was nothing else. And so, like it says in Revelation 13, all that dwell on the earth will worship the beast, i.e. Rome, except for the names that have been written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And as it says, they will worship the beast. How are they worshipping the beast? They're worshipping the beast through the pagan wheel, which is Baal worship. On a month where the pagans celebrate Yule, they called it Christmas. On a month where they celebrate Ostara, spring equinox, they call it Easter. So this is how they're worshipping the beast. And whether we try and tell people to flee this idolatry, they've been given the influence of strong delusion because they've rejected the gospel. That's what it says in 2 Thessalonians. So also, as it says in the Revelation 13, that, or is it Revelation 17, it says the beast ascends out of the abyss, which it goes, it was, or the Roman Empire was dealt a sort of a critical wound in the Germanic Wars, but it lived because the Germans carried it on. And this is where you have a merger between the clay and the iron in the visions of Daniel. You see, there's a synthesis between Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation. I wrote a book on it. If you're interested, it's called The Book of the Exiles. You can find it online. And I wrote about this chapter with Behemoth and Leviathan, saying very similar things. But there's a synthesis between these books because Daniel basically gives you the exegesis on Revelation 13, where he says that the beasts are the empires, and so Leviathan becomes a kind of ghost. That's how I tie it into all this and make it kind of easier to understand. It comes back up out of the abyss. So that Leviathan, i.e. pagan Rome, is like a ghost, and you have Behemoth, which is like the current empire, which is the Holy Roman Empire, came along with Charlemagne around 900, or was it 800? And they continued they did this decree where they say that they were continuing the line of Roman emperors, and the Pope was kingmaker. And if you look into this, I've put some maps on here for you to check it out. You can see how the Holy Roman Empire was prevalent in its upholding of the Roman Catholic Church, and this was headed for problems when you had Martin Luther in the 16th century, and there was what was called the 30 Years' War, which was between the German princes, German kings who had converted to Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation, and those German kings who were holding fast to being loyal to the apostate Roman Catholic Church. So this is basically the way to interpret and to understand Behemoth and Leviathan. The two work together for the 42 months. Where there's a discontinuation of a physical Leviathan, there is a continuation of a ghost-like Leviathan over the 42 months. The 42 months are called so because Christ came and ministered for 42 months. And so, a literal 42 months. That was 3.5 years, and then he was crucified. And so we use this term, in my opinion, is used in the Bible to describe the evangelizing of the gospel, because that's what Christ did for 3.5 years. He basically preached the gospel. So the gospel is going to be preached for this duration of the last days, which was from the cross. We take that from the cross till the second coming. So from the crucifixion to the second coming, these are the last days, the 42 months. I've mentioned this quite a lot. If we look into the dates and everything, you can see that this all ties into scripture. I'm going to come back and do another follow-up video, because there's a vision of the three-headed eagle in the later is it chapter 9 kind of thing? But I'm going to come back into that. That's also talking about the divisions of the Roman Empire. That one is very difficult to understand. I don't know if even I'm going to. I don't think anything myself. I probably shouldn't say even if but I don't know exactly the exegesis of the three-headed eagle. But I'm going to have a good crack at it, and I'll probably do a follow-up video on this and see where we go. But any comments, any questions, leave them, and we'll look at it. Okay.